talk to me about how the research that you're talking about really it's not about fasting. It's not about,
Mhm.
it's more about the awareness of how one feels, how one's reacting. Talk to me a little bit more about the hunger habit, because I think it's really interesting and it's going to help a lot of people.
No, thank you. So one thing that I noticed relatively early in my psychiatry career, I fell on my face a lot. So I learned a ton. The more I fell on my face, the more I learned. So one face plant was working with a group of they were all women. It happened to be because it's more the binge eating
Prevalent.
disorder is more prevalent in women. And so these women were all there with binge eating disorder. I had this group medical visit where we would all work together, because a group setting can be helpful in this way. And at the beginning, I was really struggling. I was like, what am I missing? What am I missing? Because I learned this calories in, calories out formula in medical school, and they just made it seem so simple. Like, oh, just follow the formula. And use your willpower. Where's your willpower? So with that group, I learned after about a month of working with them that, and one woman put it beautifully. She said, I have a craving and I eat, or I have an urge and I eat. And I was like, well, is it hunger or is it something else? And she's like, it's an urge. What are you talking about? And what she was highlighting was that we have a physiologic mechanism for hunger. It's called homeostatic hunger, which means if you're not balanced, if you're not at homeostasis, your body's going to say, hey, get back there, because that's your optimal level. And so when we're hungry, we're below that homeostatic level, and it says eat some food to get back up there. So homeostatic hunger helpful for survival. We now have a new term for hunger because this non-homeostatic hunger is so prevalent. I'm not even calling it's not really hunger, but we eat when we're not hungry. So that's called hedonic hunger, meaning that we eat because of emotions. We eat because we're tired, all these things. The hangry term combines, stress eating, comfort food, all that stuff comes from this. And the one sentence on that is that we actually learn to eat not when we're hungry, but to make ourselves feel better. And this this pings both the positive and negative reinforcement. So we learn through all of the celebrations and parties that we go through throughout our lives that, eat to celebrate stuff, right? And so there's always a cake at a celebration for somebody's retirement or of a birthday or whatever. And then we also eat to numb ourselves. This is what a lot of my patients describe with binge eating disorder. We on the far end of the spectrum. So we can eat when we're bored, we can eat when we're sad, we can eat when we're tired, we can eat, things. But all at the far end of that spectrum, we can eat as a coping mechanism. And a lot of my patients describe this as to numb themselves. So they have a negative emotion. There's the trigger. They eat, and then that eating provides the result or the reward of numbing themselves. And a patient in particular that comes to mind, she had pretty severe binge eating disorder. She'd binge on entire pizzas 20 out of 30 days a month. So these, large pizzas. And so she's the one that actually described, I'd eat to numb myself. And on top of that, because that was the only emotional support mechanism she had learned, after she'd binge, she'd feel guilty, negative emotion, and she would binge on top of a binge, crazy. So she had no idea how her mind worked. And so with all of that as background, I started thinking, well, how can we, and I was learning as a neuroscientist that willpower is more myth than muscle. So I was like, well, I'm not going to, I see this clinically. All my patients have come into me and they're like, well, I'm yo-yo dieting. I do this diet. It doesn't, I feel like I fail. Which also highlights something important, which is, when I wrote Unwinding Anxiety, people feel like anxiety is something that happens to them. When I started doing the research around eating, and it was just actually my editor at Avery, Caroline Sutton, shout out to her. She's amazing. She said, Judd, I think a lot of people think that eating is something that there's something wrong with them. It's something that they should have control over. It's something that they do as compared to something happening to them. I was like, spot on. You just named what I'd been seeing for 10 years, both in my clinic and my research. And so I highlight that because this is how a lot of these eating habits get set up. And then they get reinforced where people feel like there's something wrong with them and they can't actually, they need to be fixed. So for anybody out there that struggled with yo-yo dieting or any type of willpower-based diet, I wrote this book to say, look, one, that's not actually neuroscience. It's a nice story we tell ourselves. And I'm sure the marketing people at the diet programs love it because they're like, just sign up for another year, you know? So two, I want to say, look, we've actually done years of research and we've got pretty good results with this, you know, with this Eat Right Now program. We can study that and we can actually take those and give people those core principles. They don't even need to use the app. They can just kind of learn some of these principles. And it really goes back to this reinforcement learning piece, which is, if this is the strongest part of our brain, how can we leverage it to help change behavior? So I mentioned earlier, you know, finding and paying attention, using awareness to help us see how unrewarding it is to overeat or to eat, you know, junk food as compared to healthy food. That really leverages that very strong part of our brain that says, hey, how good does this really feel? Is this really rewarding? Let me give a real world example. I know this guy named Judd, and he used to be addicted to gummy worms. And I write about this a little bit in The Hunger Habit, but just the highlight is, you know, I couldn't have a bag in my house because I would just have to eat the whole thing. So I started paying attention. I was like, well, you know, maybe you should start practicing some of this stuff.
Preach, yeah.
Yeah. Because I hadn't really applied my meditation practice to eating. And so I was like, well, let's see what this gummy worm tastes like. You know, first off, if you look at it, it looks like a fishing lure. You know, I'm like, okay, you know, these colors are not natural. And then I put the thing in my mouth and it's like this slimy. Yeah. Yeah. And then it's like, the first word that came to mind was petroleum product. You know, it's like, this is not natural. And it makes me want to, they've designed it to make me crave for that next one. So I'm already reaching for the next gummy worm before I've even finished chewing on the one and getting it stuck in my teeth. So it's like, oh, this isn't as good as I thought. And then I started comparing it to eating blueberries. And this is actually the third step of the process. So let's just walk through it with gummy worms. First, I have to map out my gummy worm habit loop, right? See gummy worms, eat gummy worms, pretty straightforward. And then I needed to get into that second step, which was asking myself, what am I actually getting from this? And I started to notice, wow, these don't taste very good. And I feel terrible in the morning with that gut bomb after eating the whole bag. So I become disenchanted with the gummy worms, but my brain says, okay, you know, so gummy worms aren't so great. Let's go for something better, find something better. And so I started comparing eating gummy worms to eating blueberries. And for me, boom, blueberries are like the perfect sweet pop, color, taste. You know, sometimes you get a little bit of bitter. Sometimes it's very sweet. You know, you don't know exactly what that's going to be based on the batch that you get. For me, blueberries, that was the bonanza. You know, I won my brain was like, this is it. And it's interesting because food co-evolved with people. So they're going to, you know, food's going to be quote unquote designed by nature to be that perfect sweet, you know, boom, 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 that's going to give us nutrition, but also going to feel better than the gummy worm or whatever somebody's gummy worm equivalent is. And so that's actually the third step. I call this finding the bigger, better offer, right? So when somebody pays attention and they compare blueberries to gummy worms, in my case, and I see that one, gummy worms aren't so rewarding and blueberries are, boom, very rewarding. It makes it so easy. It's a no-brainer. I can have gummy worms in my house. Somebody else can eat them because I'm not touching them, because all I have to do is recall what it was like the last time I ate one. And honestly, I can't remember the last time I ate one, but I can recall what it's like to eat them. I'm not interested. So I'm totally disenchanted with those. Put some blueberries in my house, but not if I finish dinner, I might eat a few, but I'm not going to gorge myself on an entire batch because it just doesn't feel good. But I can eat a few and be like, this is still good. And it's so that's the whole of the program, you know, and the whole of the book is really just highlighting how this works scientifically and also giving people a stepwise practice, you know, to do this. I'm going to say in there, last thing I'll say is I put in this 21-day challenge, you know, like people can follow it. And I do that specifically as a shout out to an internet myth, which is if you look on the internet, at least right now, and you say, how long does it take to form a new habit?
3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And guess what do you know what that's based on?
Nope, but I know that you were getting there, so I'm going to let you finish.
Okay. In the 1960s, a plastic surgeon wrote a book. And he said in his book, he said, oh, it takes about 3 weeks for my patients to get used to their new nose jobs. And so that plus internet, where somebody's like, oh yeah, 3 weeks sounds about right. That sounds good. That's a good heuristic. No science behind it. So it's like, yeah, there's an internet myth around that. So I'm like, okay, let's play on this, and so it's not like anybody can nail this in 21 days. Certainly we've seen people nail it pretty quickly, but really people have to go at their own pace. And the key is, as long as they're bringing awareness in, as long as they're bringing curiosity and importantly, kindness to themselves as they go through the process, they're going to be open. They're going to be in their growth mindset. This is what Ted Lasso is all about, is like open to your experience, see what you can learn from it. And in that sense, we're always going to be moving forward, even if we feel like we're taking a step backwards, because we learn more from those trips than when we're just running full speed ahead and we're not, we don't have to see, what's actually going on.
And it's way harder to be kind to yourself. Sometimes I think a lot of people struggle with kindness to themselves. They do not self-talk kindness. They do not internally dialogue kindness in any capacity. They don't even see kindness in the mirror when they look at themselves. And that can be a really big challenge. And it's a lot easier for us to be kind to another human than it is for us to be kind to ourselves. And so when you're trying to break those habits, that's really powerful.
I know. It's so ironic because, if we look at how we talk to ourselves and judge ourselves, and we ask ourselves, would you do that to your best friend? Heck no. We never do, but we're doing it all the time to ourselves. Well, how can we learn to become friends with ourselves again?
Yeah, sometimes we just have to listen to ourselves, right? I mean, how many times do you know something and you're telling somebody else something that you're teaching them and they're like, "Oh, that's perfect." And then you go back and you're thinking about it later and like, "I need to implement." It's the gummy bear story you just gave. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to utilize the very things that we know. We know a lot. It doesn't mean that we do it. So, and I guess you have to stay curious
Yeah.
because curiosity is something that grows, like you mentioned. It's something that continues to build. It's not something that just dies, hopefully.
Yes. Yes. No. Well, if we look, so let's use a concrete example. So with my patients who have cravings for Doritos or Cheetos or whatever the engineered food is, food-like object. I'm not sure Cheetos is actually food.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't think
the
so.
the calorie delivery mechanism. um, if we look at those and we have this craving to eat, we can fight that craving, right? That's that willpower depletion type of thing at best. Or we can get curious about what that craving feels like. And so let me ask you, what feels better? I'm not paying you to answer any particular way, but what's it feel like to fight a craving or to get curious about what it feels like in your body?
I guess to be curious. I mean,
Yeah.
it's always better to be curious. I'm somebody that X-nays it. Like if it immediately, just if we're talking about personal, if it feels like it's something that I'm losing control over, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
like the way I feel with it, I kill it immediately. I
Mm-hmm.
love ice cream. I cut out gluten. I cut out all these things years ago, and I've slowly introduced everything back because I realized it was more of a response to stress than it was the dieting and
Yeah.
the challenges. But the
Yeah.
point is that the first way I dealt with it was I exclude it. So I get curious first to see, can I do without it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a curiosity. To me, it's a biohack
Yep.
to my own brain, my own body. Then I get to the point where I start to evaluate what it is, that how it's affecting me. How did I
Yeah.
feel? I never realized how ice cream negatively impacted me in the morning. I gave up alcohol for 40 days during Lent last year, and I would get to the point where I just needed something bad for me. And I mean, I'm serious. It's 8:30 at
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
I don't believe in this, and I don't even eat ice cream anymore, but I eat like a coconut milk ice cream, a fake ice cream,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I would eat just a small amount, and I would wake up in the morning, and it feels like like you're almost like that sugar hangover. And I started to
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to how it made me feel,
Yeah.
and I don't think I've eaten it but once or twice in a year, to your point,
Yeah.
because of
So
that.
and that's a beautiful example of paying attention to the results of the behavior. And if it's not rewarding, we're going to stop. This also reminds me of something. One of the last chapters in the hunger habit is about meeting our needs versus feeding our wants. And your story brings this up because often we have this urge to eat something. It's like, oh, if I haven't done it, especially if we haven't done it in a while, this is called the abstinence violation effect, where our brain's like, oh, you got to, And so we finally go and we indulge, right? And so there's a feeding of the want. But if you look at the late at night, right, we can ask ourselves, is this just a habit, a craving to eat something because I've always done it, or I'm bored, or I'm tired, right? So if we really ask ourselves, what do I need right now? It's unlikely, if we've had dinner or whatever, it's unlikely that we actually need more calories. And in fact, what we might need is to take care of ourselves and go to sleep, like drink some water, make sure we're hydrated. Often that's also a way to work with that. And then go to sleep. And then we can look at, when I meet my needs, I don't feel guilty. I don't get that food hangover, in the morning, the sugar hangover. Oh, that actually feels good. And then we can start to listen to our bodies even more and listen to our minds even more, and just ask that simple question: what do I need, as compared to, here's this want, and what happens when I don't feed that want? So, some of these things are very, very simple, but it can be extraordinarily powerful if somebody just knows that very simple differentiation.
Yeah, I think it has to be simple, because we have to be able to see sometimes when you're challenged with something significant, it feels so big to you, but the simple
Mm.
answer could often be the very thing that changes it and helps you move towards the goal that you have for yourself. And so simplicity is always the best way to be able to combat something. And it sounds simple, but it's still hard to execute upon. And but the research is obviously interesting, because when you give research that 60% of people had an impact within what, 10 to 15 days, or repeat that.
Yes. So with the eating, it was 10 to 15 times. So it didn't even take
Sorry.
weeks. It was 10 to 15 times of somebody paying attention as they overate. Our bodies are so much wiser than our brains. So I think of it this way: as our thinking brain is not nearly as strong as our feeling body. If we just listen to that body, it's got all this wisdom. And it'll be like, dude, you really want to overeat? Doesn't take long. No, this isn't actually helpful. It feels better not to overeat. And it can show up in remarkable ways. I remember a patient that I had that used to eat an entire bag of potato chips, like not a small one, but a big bag of potato chips every night as she'd watch television with her daughter. And so I said, well, just pay attention as you eat, like bond with your daughter, game on, open up the bag, and just ask yourself, how many chips is enough? You ready? Can you guess how many, or I can just tell you?
Tell me.
Two. So I call her my two potato chip lady. And she's like, yep, there was so much salt in them. I was like, enough, after two potato chips. So she could enjoy the two potato chips. Like she enjoyed eating them. But when she paid attention, she's like, do I need more? Nope, I'm good. Two potato chips. Boy, think about how much money she saved. Because that bag of potato chips probably lasted her half a month or longer, as compared to, buying a new one every day.
Yeah, not to mention the medical bills of not eating that stuff all the time. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a
Her arteries
life-changing.
thanked her, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.